Welcome to the Veterans Legal Lowdown. First things first, we want to give a shout out to our amazing viewers. We've reached 100,000 subscribers on YouTube, and we couldn't have done this without you. So thanks for watching, thanks for sharing, and continue to join us for exciting veterans legal content every month. To announce that you can now listen to us via Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. So be sure to continue to tune in. We're halfway through 2025, and there has been a ton going on. Congress is on its recess, so let's review what's happened so far. We're going to talk about legislative matters, budget issues, and some recent news about VA community care and the most popular claims for 2025. First and foremost, I'm Emma Peterson. I'm a partner here at Chisholm Chisholm Kilpatrick, and today I'm joined by
Maura Black. I'm also a partner here at CCK. Emma and I have been working with veterans here at the firm, me for 9 years and Emma for 10, 11? 11 years. So this is the backdrop of our information and experience we want to bring today. As Emma mentioned, we're going to be talking more about 2025 developments, the 2026 budget proposal, but that is all with the intention of hoping to bring good information to you all. We keep these things in mind when we're handling a very high volume of claims and appeals here at CCK. We have a very robust team that handles cases before the agency, also before the U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. Happy to be here with you today. And Emma, do you want to start us off with our first item to talk about today?
Sure. Today, we're going to talk about an issue that's been in the news for the last several years, and that's veterans' referrals to community care is no longer going to require an additional doctor review. So vets seeking community care in their communities as opposed to going to a VA medical center will no longer require a second level of review and authority to get that care.
And as background, VA care through VA medical centers is pretty standard. There are also options for veterans to attain care through community providers. So this is actually a question that we get a lot from current clients and others. To what extent do veterans benefits enable claimants to seek community care? So community care is a really good option for those who maybe don't live close to a VA medical center, who want to work with a specific provider in the community. And as Emma mentioned, historically, the requirement has been to have this second referral layer. So every veteran, in order to get that outside referral, needs 2 doctors to basically sign off on that. That's a lot. That can cause a delay in the process of receiving care. And so I think one of the pros of this new approach, where there's only one referral required, is that we're going to be able to see veterans have easier, quicker access to those community care referrals that are really important for veterans, especially in communities where community care providers are more accessible than VA providers.
That's right. And so this change went into effect, was mandated by Congress in December of 2024. VA has announced it's going into effect now in 2025. And as you mentioned, it allows eligible veterans to receive medical care from non-VA providers in their local community. And so there are some pros and cons, but let's talk about what this care is and how it's authorized. So it's paid for by VA under specific conditions. So if VA can't provide you care at your local VA medical center in a timely manner, if there's a super long wait, or you live in a location that's very far away from a VA MC, they might authorize community care in that instance. If VA doesn't offer the specific service or specialty that you need, think maternity care, maternity wards, VA medical centers don't have those oftentimes. They'll authorize community care in that instance. And then sometimes there could be an instance where the veteran and their provider at VA agree that seeking community care is in the veteran's best medical interest. So before the change that VA just announced went into effect, even if a VA doctor referred you to community care, you still had to have an additional clinical review. And that can cause delay and confusion, which we do not want for our veterans seeking healthcare treatment. The extra review is often seen as an unnecessary hurdle that was slowing down access to care.
And that's exactly why I think this change has been popular with veterans. It's also received a positive response from lawmakers that are saying that this removal of the added hurdle for veterans to receive health care, of course, I think everyone can agree that it's not a good idea for veterans to have these extra layers of review that don't really serve a strong purpose or a good purpose. On the flip side, there are some that say that that extra layer of review with the 2 referrals would have made an impact or was previously making an impact as far as making sure that funds were being spent appropriately and that any care that veterans could receive through VA medical centers was being provided so that everyone wins. The veteran gets care and it also minimizes costs for the government. But I think overall, the response has been very positive that there is no need for 2 layers of referral in every instance. And as Emma mentioned before, there are some specialties that are not available through VAMCs. So veterans who need a specific referral to a provider who does something specialized, it's really important for veterans to be able to get that in a timely way.
That's right. And you said something that we're going to talk about a little later when we get to VA's budget proposal, but is the spending. And so costs for community care have been increasing. So VA spent about $28.5 billion on community care alone in fiscal year 2024. So some of the folks that question this move and are a little bit concerned about community care question, should we be spending that money in the community on private medical health care, or should we be reinvesting that money into upping the services offered by our VA medical center? So that's, really where the line stands and something we'll have to keep an eye on and certainly talk more about as we get further into 2025.
Definitely. And it's definitely in line, like you said, with the budget proposal that we're going to talk about in a few minutes, because healthcare is interestingly one of the biggest budget items in the proposal. This is not uncommon, but I think it's something that we have been really waiting to see what happened with this year's budget. There's been a lot of talk about cuts, not only to spending and allocated funds from the government, but also with employees. And so there were a lot of questions. I know we've talked about this internally about how are those cuts going to affect different areas of VA? How is it going to affect the healthcare side of things? How will it affect the benefit side of things? And so definitely the agreement of the importance of veterans being able to access care in a timely fashion at low cost, I think, is something that people have been able to support.
Absolutely.
Okay, so on that note, we've talked a few times about the budget proposal. We want to get into the details of that today. Each year, the Department of Veterans Affairs, and we've covered this in the past, proposes a budget. The budget proposal is submitted to Congress, and it outlines the way that the agency intends to spend its money in the upcoming fiscal year. So the budget is very revealing. We take a close look at the budget because we want to know what are the agency's spending priorities, where is the agency planning to allocate funds, where can we expect to see significant changes up or down based on the funding that's allocated. So we've got a lot of numbers. We also have numbers in comparison to previous years' spending, which is, again, important for us to track just to kind of see where the agency is at in terms of prioritizing its different expenditures. So, and one note before we get into those specifics, this is just a proposal. The budget has passed the House. It's also been going through the Senate, I believe. I don't know if it's fully, as of today, I'm not sure if it's fully through that process, but it is in the midst of approval. And so we have the information today from the proposed budget. We don't have anything final. It's, of course, subject to change throughout the process.
Absolutely. And before we get into numbers, because I'm going to read some numbers and they're pretty big, keep in mind VA is a absolutely massive agency, and it's really 3 agencies in one. There's the healthcare side of VA, the VHA, which we've been talking about. There's the VBA, the Veterans Benefit Administration, which deals with disability benefits. And then there's the cemetery arm. So this really is 3 agencies in one. So this budget is quite large, but I've got some numbers for us. All right. So first and foremost, VA's fiscal year 2026 budget proposal totals $441.2 billion. Feel a little bit like Dr. Evil there.
Monopoly money.
This is about a 10% increase from fiscal year 2025. So that's substantial. It is the largest budget request in VA history. Really no surprise. Obviously, costs are going up, but that's quite the budget. What is in a VA budget? So VA serves around 17.9 million veterans and their dependents every year. the operation of the largest healthcare system that we just talked about in the United States, with over 9.2 million veterans getting care at VA medical centers. The budget also includes disability compensation portion of it. Right about now, about 7 million or so veterans are getting disability benefits and their survivors. Or their family members. VA also offers a pension program, and that benefits over 200,000 veterans and their survivors. Every year, the VA medical centers operate about 162.6 million outpatient visits a year. So that's a lot of care being offered. Other things included in the budget include $3 billion for construction programs. So the actual physical spaces where these medical centers occur, or the disability benefits have their operations, places for people to go, whether being new spaces or upgrading existing spaces. VA also manages a whole education assistance program for veterans and their family members, and about 1.1 million trainees are covered under this budget. Similar to that, the VR&E program, which I'm sure a lot of our viewers are familiar with, the VOC Rehab, the Veteran Readiness and Employment Program, benefits for more than 189,000 people for fiscal year 2026. VA also oversees VA loans, so the loan guarantee service benefits for 4.2 million veteran homes loans. Unfortunately, an interment of about 135,000 veterans and eligible family members to be buried at national cemeteries. So the budget really is broad. It covers all the spaces that VA manages, which is quite vast. And really, it's not surprising that it's the largest budget in VA history, considering the work that needs to get done.
And one part of the budget that we've already talked about that's definitely on people's minds is how will the budget reflect the agency's healthcare priorities, especially given the discussion we had earlier about community care versus VA care. So healthcare is receiving a substantial investment to enhance access and quality, which is great. The total combined healthcare funding that's proposed in the budget is approximately $165.1 billion. This is a 17% increase over last year. I think that's pretty striking. The major focus areas of the proposed budget and where the funds would be allocated are for community care expansion, like we've discussed. This would be a funding increase for community care of over 50% from last year's budget. There's also funds allocated, as there has been in the past, for mental health care and suicide prevention, and the continued implementation of PACT Act for toxic exposures. So that's another important one. We've talked about this in years past, and we're still seeing the effects of the passage of the PACT Act in 2022. It resulted in a huge increase in claims and appeals filed for conditions that are presumptive as of the PACT Act and as of that date. It's also had this effect of increasing the need for healthcare around those conditions. So it's good to see that allocation is in the budget and that VA is thinking about expanding access and bolstering care for those veterans who were affected by the PACT Act and those new presumptions.
So that's a good segue into what I think a lot of people watching this segment are going to be super interested in is veterans' disability benefits. And so the mandatory budget for benefits is $301.2 billion for this fiscal year. And that's a sizable increase. It's up $34.2 billion. So again, ripples of the PACT Act and ripples of other pieces of legislation coming through as we see more and more folks filing claims for benefits or seeking to get increased benefits as their disability maybe worsens throughout their life. So VA keeping an eye on that and making sure they're allocating enough funds for the program. That budget covers disability compensation. It also includes the money for education benefits and home loans. So not just strictly straight disability benefits, but all three of those areas. Another interesting thing that VA is finally getting back to, and we'd talked about this in years past and have kept an eye on it, it's gone through a number of delays and twists and turns, is the Accelerated Electronic Health Record Modernization Program. I'm not even sure if this is a HERM or what. We have a lot of acronyms in this space, but EHRM. VA is allocating $2.17 billion for renewed deployment efforts. So they had tried this a while ago. It did not go great. I think there were issues with the vendor, or do you remember this?
Vaguely, and it's hard to keep this separate from other issues with other tech and other vendor type problems, but totally sounds familiar.
I vaguely remember congressional hearings. It did not go well. So we're reinvesting in this, which is great. And so I'll be excited to see what happens because certainly electronic healthcare records are super important, especially for veterans to get access to their own records as they may need them throughout their lives. Some other areas, infrastructure modernization is in this budget, $900 million for major construction projects. So we talked about how there's going to be I think about $3 billion for construction, but the $900 million is for major construction projects. And then conversely, there's also a line item here for reduction in staff for across VA. So although the exact amount is under debate and it hasn't really been published, we're going to be spending some more money building up programs, allowing more veterans to get care while at the same time reducing a workforce. I think that's going to be an interesting situation to watch unfold.
Definitely. And this is something we've kept an eye on. We'll probably mention it later in this segment. So at the risk of repeating, we do know that the workforce reductions in government employees generally, but also with respect to the VA is concerning to folks who are wondering how it will impact their access to care or to speedier claim adjudications. I think every viewer out there who is either a VA claimant or a practitioner is not enthused about the prospect of fewer VA employees to work the pending backlog of claims and appeals. It just doesn't seem to make sense. So initially, the number that VA had proposed was around 83,000 employee cuts. That was months ago. Thankfully, we've seen some reports that have indicated that VA plans to shrink its employee staff by closer to 30,000 employees, so less than half of that 83,000 figure that was floated a few months ago. And VA has also said that the workforce cuts are meant to be accomplished by attrition. So that can mean organic retiring, not filling positions that have been left vacant, downsizing in a slower and more gradual way. That's what's being said. So definitely still a concern that there will be these cuts, as you mentioned. How can there be more claimants, more presumptive conditions through the PACT Act, more opportunities for different access to care, more specialties, and yet fewer employees? So that's definitely something that we will keep watching. But for right now, what we understand is that they've backed off that 80,000 employee figure for cuts, and they are moving more toward a 30,000 employee figure. So we'll have to see what happens with that. Another part of the budget, housing and homelessness initiatives. There is a major push. This is also consistent with previous years to reduce veteran homelessness with targeted funding. There's a dedicated $3.4 billion specifically for homelessness initiatives in the 2026 VA budget. There are also currently a half a dozen legislative proposals focused on increasing programs that will prevent or reduce homelessness through grants and rent assistance and other things like that.
Some other notable changes for this fiscal year, the total funding increase is about $42 billion more. So we mentioned largest VA budget ever. Resumption of that electronic health record modernization effort after previous delays. Enhanced community care funding, about 50% more for community care funding going into this year. Administrative staffing reductions, but increased funding for healthcare services, homelessness, or veterans at risk of suicide.
So a current status of where we are at with these budget proposals. This summer in June, the House passed a $435 billion version of the proposed budget. The votes for the budget were pretty close, 218 to 206 members of the House, and those were largely cast along partisan lines. In July of this year, the Senate Appropriations Committee advanced a $456 billion VA budget plan with broad bipartisan support. And the Senate version did make some changes. We're not going to go into all of them in detail, but they omitted some of the amendments that were contained in the proposal that did pass the House. So there were some more controversial amendments that were included in the initial budget proposal that were weeded out by the Senate. The Senate priorities still included access to mental health treatment, veteran suicide prevention, rural care, benefits, and GI Bill programs. And another point on the staffing issue that we've been talking about, the Senate proposal includes language that assures that veterans are, quote, never denied care or timely access to care as a result of the damaging or arbitrary cuts to the VA workforce. And so this I thought was really important to bring up because it's very clear from what we've read and studied so far that the Senate has those staffing reductions in mind when they're passing these budget proposals. So exactly to the point that you made earlier, Emma, the budget is not going to be a successful allocation of funds if the funds are spent in a way that doesn't have enough staff to be able to implement all of the initiatives that they would bring about. So I thought that was a really interesting observation and sort of sentiment behind the Senate's approach to the budget proposal. Still things that we need to keep an eye on. And this is all proposed, as we mentioned before, so nothing is final yet. But it's clear that Congress is definitely thinking about not just what funds will be allocated where, but how will those funds be able to convert into the initiatives that the agency has. And staffing is a really key part of that. The VA budget is very unlikely to be passed by itself. It's expected to be part of a full government package, and that is likely later to happen in 2025.
Yep. Stay tuned. All right, let's switch gears. Let's get away from the budget. Let's get away from healthcare, and let's talk about the 10 most common disabilities, 2025 update. So we like to look at this topic periodically because it suggests how different generations of veterans are affected by different types of disabilities, by the different type of conflicts they participated in, trainings at the time. We can see some interesting trends as generations go by. And it's also useful info for those of you out there wondering, can I get this granted? Is this something I should apply for? Have others successfully won this claim? So we like to look at this from time to time. And so for the record, we're looking back in time. We don't know what the most common claims are this year yet, but we're going to look at fiscal year 2024. There's a section called Prevalent Service-Connected Disabilities of New Compensation Recipients that the VBA puts out in their annual benefits report. So we've pulled from there. We've coalesced the data for you, and we're going to take a quick run through the most common disability claims for new service-connected conditions in fiscal year 2024. So Maura, without further ado, the number one that I think has been the number one since I started here 11 years ago.
It's tinnitus.
It's tinnitus.
Top of the list is tinnitus. There have been 273,000 over that approved claims. And most people know this by now because tinnitus is such a common disability that is claimed and granted for all kinds of veterans. You are only able to get a 10% rating for tinnitus. That's it. You can't get an increase over 10%. The way that the rating schedule works is basically if you have tinnitus, you'll get a 10%. It's a fairly subjective condition as far as explaining how it affects a person or what the symptoms are. And so that's a pretty straightforward one. It's 10% all around. And it's number one on the list, like I'm sure it has been in the past.
Exactly. So number two on the list is a knee disability, limitation of flexion. 153,205 approved claims. Your rating options are 0%, 10%, 20%, 30%, and it's based on your degrees and range of motion. If you go to a VA C&P exam, a compensation and pension exam, the examiner is going to get out that gauge rater thing that will measure how far you can bend your knee and at what angle. But obviously, for, I think, pretty apparent reasons, knee conditions are pretty common due to the wear and tear of military training and gear.
Yes. And these are covered, the knee conditions are covered in Diagnostic Code 5260. We will talk about the diagnostic codes associated with some of the conditions that we are talking about today. If you need to find the language of a diagnostic code, you can easily search for it. The diagnostic codes are in Title 38 of the Code of Federal Regulations within VA's disability schedules at 4 point whatever for all the different conditions that are rated. The third condition on our list is a lumbosacral or cervical strain. So think lower back condition or a neck condition. There have been 132,617 approved claims for these conditions, and your rating options go from 10% to 20%, 30, 40, 50, or even a 100% total rating for a condition affecting your low back or your cervical spine. And these ratings are usually assigned, as Emma mentioned before with knee conditions, based on limitation of motion. So this is why compensation and pension exams are usually asked for and are important in these types of claims, because a VA examiner will need to measure the movement you're able to achieve with your spine, and that's going to correspond to how you're rated. And the diagnostic code that governs spinal conditions, you can find it at 5237.
I will say for the low back and the cervical spine, that 40%, 50%, 100% rating is pretty hard to get. You have to be completely unfavorably ankylosed, so like bent over in your spine to get those higher ratings. But we do often see folks getting the 10% or the 20% right out of the gate. Number 4 on the list, frankly, surprised me. I mean, I don't know why I'm surprised. It's another orthopedic condition, but limitation of motion of the arm. There were 100, I can't speak right now. There were 597 claims approved for limitation of motion of the arm. When you're talking about the arms, usually, depending on the diagnostic code, there'll be a slightly higher rating if it's your dominant arm. So if you're right-handed, left-handed, and that's the arm that's impacted, you're going to get a little bit higher of a rating. That dominant side versus non-dominant, your ratings are 20%, 30%, 40%. Again, based on how high the arm can be raised. So midway between the side and the shoulder, so on and so forth, that VA will measure you at the C&P exam.
Mm-hmm.
Also think shoulder conditions when you think limitation of motion of the arm.
Mm-hmm. Number 5 on the list, we're back to auditory conditions. Hearing loss had over 108,000 approved claims in the time that we measured. The rating options go from 0 to 100% in 10% increments. And I would echo the same comment that Emma just made about limitation of motion of the arm. Most of the time we see hearing loss rated pretty low at 0 or 10%.
Mm-hmm.
That is what's most common in my experience. It is still possible to achieve those higher ratings, 60%, 80%, or even a total rating for more profound, more seriously disabling hearing loss.
That's right. And so you would think that maybe hearing loss would be number 2, back to tinnitus, but it's not, because not only is it harder to get our actual higher rating, it's hard to get rated in the first place, because there's a difference between hearing loss as the medical community thinks about it and hearing loss for VA purposes. So a lot of people are frustrated when they get that tinnitus rating and then they don't get hearing loss, or they get tinnitus at 10% and 0% for their hearing loss. So take a look at the diagnostic code for hearing loss. It's a little confusing. There's a table and chart involved. Know that it involves, audiological testing and speech discrimination scores, but number 5, hearing loss. All right. Number 6, scars and burns. We had over 96,000 approved claims for that. Scars and burns are rated based on a couple different ways. One has to do with the size of the scar or the burn. And another thing that VA looks to is the characteristics of the actual underlying scar. Is it painful? Is it unstable? Is it prone to kind of maybe getting a sore? Does it limit your movement or your function? And so depending on the size and the characteristics of disfigurement, is that what the term is? I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. Yeah,
exactly.
VA can grant you up to 80% for that condition. And those are in diagnostic code 70801 to 70805 if you want to take a look and see what your options are.
And that's a good point about the disfigurement, Emma, that you mentioned. And it reminds me of a reminder that I think would be useful. VA's rating schedule is based on average impairment in earning capacity. In other words, and the way that I try to explain it to clients and try to understand it myself, VA cares about rating conditions that are functionally disabling. Conditions that would impede your ability to earn a living are things that VA wants to meet with monthly compensation for claimants. So with something like a scar, VA cares not just about the size of the scar, which is relevant, but also, is there any pain associated? Because that could cause functional limitations. Or is there any disfigurement associated? Because that could really impede someone's quality of life. Number 7 on the list is paralysis of the sciatic nerve. This is a specific one, but because we know that low back conditions are also very prevalent, it makes sense that related sciatica, which is often appearing in tandem with a back disability, is a populist sort of high volume claim for VA. Over 86,000 approved claims, and your rating options for paralysis kind of run the gamut. You can get a 10, a 20, a 40, a 60, or an 80. And those rating levels are associated with different types of impairment of the nerve. So VA has terms that are not so specifically defined, but we'll leave that for another day. If they decide that your condition is mild, moderate, moderately severe, or severe, they will increase your rating percentage accordingly. You can see these at diagnostic code 8520. I would also give a shout out at this point to the M21, which is the VA Adjudication Procedures Manual, because if you go to this diagnostic code for any type of paralysis or nerve condition, you might see very vague criteria like mild, moderate, moderately severe. And you might be wondering, how do I know if my condition measures up to a specific level? The M21 has some good information. It's not as much as I would want, frankly, but it makes it more workable for claimants to understand where they might fall on the rating schedule for paralysis, because the diagnostic code, again, it's vague.
That's right. All right, number 8 on the list, limitation of motion of the ankle. Again, orthopedic conditions coming in hot, not surprising. Only 2 ratings for the ankle. You can get a moderate rating at 10% or a marked rating at 20%. So if your impairment is marked, get that 20%. It's on both sides. You could get a bilateral factor, which would bump you up a little bit. But over 85,000 claims for the ankle in fiscal year 2024.
Number 9 on the list is migraines. Over 83,000 approved claims for migraines. We deal with these a lot. And I think that is because the rating criteria for migraines are also a little vague. It's gotten better since we've been practicing in this area. There's actually been a good amount of case law that has been helpful to understanding how VA rates different headaches or migraine conditions. You can receive ratings including 0%, 10%, 30%, or 50%. The diagnostic criteria are very specific. They're a little complicated in the sense that you need to be proving that your migraines occur with a certain degree of frequency. And also, the VA will get really fixated on whether the migraine attacks are prostrating attacks, or if you're in the 50% realm, whether they're very frequent and very prostrating. So the language that VA uses in the diagnostic code, again, is a little bit challenging. I would recommend reaching out to an advocate if you are dealing with an underrated migraines condition and are hitting a dead end with it. Just a complex rating schedule, and I think that's part of the reason why we see these so much. But migraines can be particularly disabling if you are experiencing very frequent attacks that require rest or complete withdrawal from social interactions or screens or things like that. So there can be a lot at stake, given that these can be really severe conditions.
Absolutely. And then rounding out the list at number 10 is post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. You know, I think we hope for a day when this isn't in the top 10, but it is. And so your rating options are anywhere from 0%, which there's a proposed language change to this diagnostic code for all the mental health conditions to get rid of 0%, because it doesn't make sense. But right now, your options are 0%, 10%, 30%, 50%, 70%, all the way up to 100% rating. And so the way the PTSD diagnostic code works, and it works the same for all mental health conditions, it's based on both your social impairment and your occupational impairment, the severity and frequency of your symptoms and how those interplay, as Maura mentioned, to impairing your ability to work in an occupational setting. So we had over 81,000 PTSD claims approved in fiscal year 2024.
We are going to move on to some Q&A. We are hoping to make this a regular feature of our episodes going forward. But something that we want to do a better job of is answering questions that come in from viewers and even from individuals that we're interacting with, other practitioners, potential clients. We see the same questions a lot, frankly. And we wanted to make sure that we were spending time to address questions that people may have had about the things that we're discussing. So I'm going to cover some Q&A on community care changes. We talked about these earlier, so some of this might be a little bit repetitive, but these are common questions that we're seeing about the community care changes that are new this year. So the first is, can I go to a private doctor through VA without getting a second VA doctor's approval? We know the answer, if you were listening earlier, to be yes, because as of this year, VA no longer requires that second doctor's referral to effectuate a community care referral. What is VA community care? I hope we covered this earlier. It does allow eligible veterans to receive medical care from non-VA providers when VA can't provide a sufficient service with respect to the type of care that the veteran needs. Can a veteran choose which community provider they go to? Yes, if VA approves the referral. So this is a little bit tricky. There's not total control from the veteran's perspective about who they can see and when. They do need that VA referral. But if you have that referral, you can choose within a VA network of community care providers. Can I refer myself to community care? Hopefully, we just answered that previously. You cannot. You must get a referral from VA first, which is why community care does increase your options, but it doesn't make them totally limitless. You do need that referral from a VA provider. And finally, does private insurance pay for community care? No. VA pays the community care provider directly for any authorized care that is approved of with the VA referral.
So let's hit 5 questions that people might have about VA 2026 budget and legislative priorities. So first and foremost, how much is VA asking for in the 2026 budget? VA has proposed a $441.2 billion budget, which is the largest in its history. Question 2, what are the top priorities in the 2026 VA budget? There's access to healthcare, that's critical, mental health access, suicide prevention, increased community care expansion, and homelessness support. Question 3, is the 2026 VA budget final? No, as of the timing of this discussion, it's passed the House, but still needs to work its way through the Senate and then probably reconciliation between the two. Question 4, is VA getting any closer to modernizing its electronic healthcare record system? Fingers crossed, yes. VA is restarting their modernization process with a $2.17 billion request allocated for 2026 to get that electronic healthcare record modernized. And finally, question 5 about the budget and legislative priorities for VA. Will VA cut its staff in 2025 or 2026? Stay tuned. VA plans to reduce staff by around 30,000 through attrition and not mass layoffs, but we'll keep a close eye on this and give you an updated answer as we get more information.
Some Q&A with respect to the most commonly claimed disabilities in 2024. The first question, what is the most common VA disability claim? We already talked about this. It's tinnitus, with over 273,000 claims approved in the last year. Question 2, can I get more than a 10% rating for tinnitus?
No, I mean, okay, I want to take a pause here. I don't think you can. I don't think I've seen one rating over 10% for tinnitus under extra scheduler rating, but it is nigh impossible to do. So no, you can't get over 10%. Is it out there? Sure. What do you think, Maura?
I think our job is to believe in all kinds of possibilities.
Exactly.
And Emma mentioned extra scheduler rating options. We have a lot of content on this, but just in case that's a totally new phrase, extra scheduler compensation is compensation for veterans who have a condition, but the impact and the effects of that condition go beyond that which is described in the diagnostic code. This gets really interesting.
Yes.
And we have a lot of experience at CCK with extra scheduler ratings. I mean, candidly, it's one of the ways to really push the boundaries of the rating schedule that do have boundaries in them. We've talked a little bit today about the diagnostic codes, the language in the diagnostic codes, how sometimes they're vague, sometimes they're extra specific. I think we should say no, you can't get more than a 10% rating for tinnitus.
Most likely no.
But the lawyers and us
can't help myself.
Right. And that there are these other pathways. We would be remiss if we didn't mention that for disabilities other than tinnitus, there are other pathways to compensation outside scheduler ratings. Not a topic we can get into today because we could spend a ton of time on it.
We could.
So anyway, sorry for the tangent. Back to tinnitus. You can only get a 10% rating. Question 3 on most common disability claims. What rating could I receive if I have limitation of knee flexion? So Emma talked about this previously. Ratings range from 0% to 30% based on how much your knee can bend. Again, now I'm seeing extra scheduler everywhere. The knee limitation of motion is the major consideration as far as applying the diagnostic code to your disability. But if you have impacts from an orthopedic condition that transcend limitation of motion, there may be opportunities to argue the applicability of a different diagnostic code, an extra scheduler rating, all kinds of things that prove to VA adjudicators that your condition is more functionally incapacitating than the diagnostic code contemplates. Next question, what determines my rating for PTSD? Emma gave a great answer of this before. It's based on how much your symptoms impact your work life and your social life together. So the diagnostic criteria for PTSD talk about what kinds of deficiencies in different areas of thinking, mood, judgment, relationships, occupational functioning. Those are the types of things that are relevant to a PTSD rating. And another thing that Emma mentioned before that we'll have more content on, this rating schedule is being revised.
Yes.
So once the new mental health diagnostic criteria are in effect, we will be all over it. This is something we've been keeping an eye on for literally years. As we've known that VA is going through this process of revising their diagnostic codes. And finally, what's the rating range for hearing loss? Technically, the range is between 0 and 100%, which is the range. It's the whole thing. But we most commonly see hearing loss ratings at 0 or 10%. Emma mentioned this before. This is because VA's rating schedule for hearing loss is super specific. Even the way that VA diagnoses hearing loss is their own particular thing. And so hearing tests, speech understanding tests, those are things that are all going to be key drivers of a hearing loss rating.
So here are some other important questions for 2025 as it relates to VA and VA disability benefits. So I think a question on everyone's mind, is VA processing claims any faster this year? And I can say, yes, they are. It's great news. VA hit 2 million processed claims earlier than ever and may reach 2.8 million by the end of the year. Now, a caveat, process does not mean granted. Process means they did something with your claim. They decided it, whether that be a favorable decision or denial. But I still think it's really great news that VA is processing claims faster this year. So well done, VA. Question 2, can I still get checks in the mail? Should I switch to direct deposit? Yes, you should switch to direct deposit. Besides just me saying, yes, please switch to direct deposit, VA is warning you that your paper checks are slower. They have to come through the mail and they're more likely to be lost or stolen. And then you have to go through the whole headache of getting a new check issue, the old check canceled. So please get direct deposit. If you don't know how to do that, please ask a friend. Please ask a youth in your area. They will assist you. I promise. You will love it.
VA has a direct deposit form if you haven't used it. They have a very specific form. You can go on their website and go to their PDF library, find the direct deposit form and submit it that way. That's what we would recommend doing. Let's not even get into the mail problems at the VA. You don't want your check to be lost in the mail. Things get lost in the mail all the time. So I totally agree with Emma's advice.
Get that done today. Okay, how much is VA spending on veteran homelessness? $3.4 billion. That's great. It's dedicated to homeless programs in the proposed 2026 budget. Another question, what housing support can I get if I am a homeless veteran? So VA offers a couple different programs. They do offer some rental help. They offer some case management to help you kind of navigate the process. And they also offer some transition housing. So certainly explore that more at your local VA. And then finally, is VA going to spend more on mental health in 2026? And again, the answer is yes. Mental health and suicide prevention are a major focus with areas. And so they've expanded the funding for programs for both of these things.
That is a wrap on our mid-year check-in for today. This, as we mentioned before, 2025 is a really important year for the VA. We know that viewers have a lot of questions about how bigger things happening on Capitol Hill will affect the VA, healthcare, disability claim adjudications, the delays at VA. So a really important year, I think, for VA's budget proposals. We're definitely tracking that to see what happens, tracking the layoffs issue as well to see how that might impact, if at all, business at the Veterans Benefits Administration and in other places. We talked a lot about community care earlier. That's an important change. And we talked about the most commonly claimed conditions, as well as all of the budget proposals.
As always, we'll keep you updated as future developments come in, especially once Congress returns from the recess. Be sure to follow and like this video, and be sure to join our 100,000 YouTube subscribers for more content. Share this episode with fellow veterans, and don't forget to leave questions for future episodes because we may be able to address those questions for you. Thanks for listening, and make sure to take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and keep the fight alive.